I'd like to introduce this morning our speaker is Tom Brereton, who is a highly experienced ecological consultant with a lifelong interest in the natural world. He has an MSc in conservation and a PhD in butterfly ecology. Tom has worked for the Northumberland Wildlife Trust as an RSPB warden and as Associate Director of the Research of Butterfly Conservation, and is a co-founder and research director of the Dorset-based charity MARINELife. Tom is currently visiting professor at Bournemouth University, visiting researcher at Exeter University, and head of ecology at Mapperton Estate, as well as having an eco-guide tourist leading bird, butterfly, mammal, and botanical tours. In this talk, Tom will be talking about the dolphins and other marine mammals of Lyme Bay and a wider southwest waters for the 20 years of marine life surveys. So over to Tom, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Judith. Nice to hear everyone and see some of you. Welcome everyone then. Yeah, so I'm going to talk about whales and dolphins of Lyme Bay, but also in the context of wider sea areas. So I hope that'll be of interest to yourselves, mostly based in North Devon. So how this all started was back in the early 1990s, some new ferry routes set up across the channel, primarily for tourism but also to transport vegetables from Brittany and Normandy over to the UK. And that brought the possibilities to go out to sea, you know, in these relatively little studied areas, because going out in a boat at sea to do surveys is always difficult and expensive. So using ships of opportunity is a great way of doing it at low cost. So we managed to get on the Portsmouth to Bilbao ferry back in 1995, and we called ourselves the Biscay Dolphin Research Programme, doing whale and dolphin and seabird surveys from that P&O vessel. So this was first trip was in June 95 with Andy Williams. I did the second trip in November, and this is the third one, February 2006. So this is the boat coming out of, bearing in mind it's a 40,000 ton ship. It looks quite small there, doesn't it, relative to the size of the waves. The waves are coming over the bridge all the time. There's a 12-meter swell, and this was us coming out of Bilbao with the prospect of sailing through all this for 20 plus hours, but managed to survive. And we did actually see some dolphins and whales on that trip, amazingly. So we found an incredible and a sort of unexpected variety of dolphins and whales in the Bay of Biscay. It was really incredible. Lots of things that hadn't been seen there before, that some of which people didn't really believe were there. So, you know, over the course of those early years in the late 90s, early 2000s, we saw well over a quarter of the world's whales and dolphins. And on those 4-day return trips, you could regularly see 12 plus species of whale and dolphin in a single short trip, which I don't think there's anywhere else in the world you can do that, to be honest. And incredible for seabirds as well. Pretty much all the European seabirds occur in quantity in the Bay of Biscay. So that was really fantastic. Some exciting discoveries. We had the first records of pygmy killer whale in the North Atlantic and published a paper on that back in 96. But this was probably the standout species, the Cuvier's beaked whale, which, as I said before, at the time, people didn't think we were seeing them. It was only till we got good photographs that they could, accept that we had seen them, they were there, and we were seeing them all the time. And that led to a PhD study on that animal. So it was a person called Jackie Smith who did a PhD at Southampton University at the National Oceanography Centre, and looked at all the data we'd collected and found this sort of strong association between occurrence and these submarine canyons, these underwater valleys, but particularly the southwest and southeast facing slopes of those deep water canyons where squid and other prey items live. So, I mean, that just shows you, just from a single passenger ferry, you can get enough data for a really novel and interesting PhD. I think the other thing about ferries is this fantastic potential to engage with the public. And I know some of you in the audience have done the sort of Lundy ferry for MARINELife a few times, and we have a wildlife officer on that ship. And the role model for that type of person came from the Portsmouth to Bilbao ferry, where we had a full-time wildlife officer, display boards and public talks, as well as showing people whales and dolphins out on the ship. And, you know, I think, you know, ferries, people can go on these boats and hadn't really appreciated that they were going to see, you know, the second biggest mammal on Earth or hundreds of dolphins. And it's a brilliant opportunity to engage with the public and enthuse them about marine animals. So we had a really dynamic guy. Clive Martin was spearheading the wildlife officer program, and over the time that the ferry was going between 95 and 2010, we probably gave lectures to 150,000 people and reached over 1 million people by doing the guided whale watching on the ship. But by the mid-2000s, we were getting itchy feet, and we wanted to go on more ferries and do similar things, and help other organisations in other countries set up similar programs, which we managed to do through an organisation called the Atlantic Research Coalition. So we helped the Irish Whale and Dolphin Group set up ferries and groups in Spain and the Mediterranean as well. And now there is quite a big European-wide network of ferry surveys. There's a lot of scepticism at the time, actually, that this data was not very good. It was just not particularly representative because it was a single fixed route, which is true. But on the other side, as I mentioned previously, it gives you the opportunity to do surveys at low cost, but also importantly year round, because most of the other sort of whale and dolphin surveys tend to be highly seasonal. But these bigger ships, you can get out in all sorts of weather conditions and still do surveys. So the second route we set up was in 2006, and that was Plymouth to Roscoff. And soon after came Poole to Santander. That was both Brittany ferries. And we grew quite rapidly to 15 routes by 2013. And then 19 routes by 2019. Then we got knocked back by COVID, unfortunately, in the global pandemic, and we're slowly building up the routes back again from that sort of peak in 2019. Unfortunately, there aren't really any ferries that go through Lyme Bay other than Brixham to Torbay, Brixham to Torquay, which isn't going to tell you a huge amount because you don't really see any dolphins there. So we wanted to get out into Lyme Bay primarily because the RSPB suggested it could be internationally important for Europe's rarest seabird, the Balearic shearwater. So this funny looking bird on the left, you can see it's in heavy wing molt, is the rarest seabird in Europe. It's globally critically endangered. So the breeding population is 10 times smaller than a polar bear, for example. And this bird breeds in the Mediterranean, in the Balearic Islands, those red dots here. And after it's bred in May and June, it undertakes a pulse breeding flight traditionally into the Bay of Biscay to molt its flight feathers and to feed on shoaling fish like anchovies. And you can see this bird, as I said, it's a typical molting bird, so it needs a lot of food in close proximity to where it's molting because they can't fly particularly well. But with climate change and changes in the distribution of fish, this bird has shifted north in recent decades. So the idea thought was all these birds must now be molting and concentrating in Lyme Bay because large counts were getting seen off Portland Bill and Berry Head and other places off the coast of Lyme Bay. And we wanted to go out into Lyme Bay and find all these birds and see if that was the case. And as I mentioned, there's no ferries there. So what we did is we asked dive boats and angling boats if we could come out on their trips as volunteers and look for Blereton shearwaters. And that was really successful. We had a really positive response from skippers who almost 100% of the time, if they had space, would let us go out on their boats. They're very, very generous people. That led to dedicated sort of funded surveys from Natural England, JNCC, the RSPB, and then we had some EU funding to do our own surveys on quite a comprehensive scale across the Western Channel. And also that led to ecotourism as well. So we collect quite a lot of data through going out showing the public whales, dolphins and seabirds, particularly through nature trek in Lyme Bay. So let's just home in a bit on Lyme Bay. So here it is. I think it's the largest natural bay in the UK. The distance between Portland Bill and Start Point is about 90 kilometres or 56 miles. So there it is off the south coast of Devon and Dorset. The colours here on the map show water depth, and the darker the colours, the shallower it is. So looking at a bigger scale, this is the area I'm going to show some information from. This is the broader picture of the sea areas either side and to the north of Lyme Bay. So primarily shallow waters, inshore less than 50 meters deep, and then it gets gradually, gently deeper the further west you go. We got a few little pockets of deeper water. Where it says island on the map, that's the Celtic Deep or the St. George's Channel. That's a deeper water area. And you can see mid-channel north of Guernsey, a strip of paler water. That's the Herd Deep, which is a trench full of radioactive waste, unfortunately. But that's like a deep sort of narrow canyon in the middle of the channel. This is a map of the seabed habitats of Lyme Bay, and it just shows how diverse the underwater marine environment is. Where Lyme Regis is, we've got those reefs, those internationally important reefs. And then beyond that, a range of different sort of sediment types across the bay in those different coloured patches. I think this shows it quite well looking at the bigger picture of the underwater environment. There you can see Lyme Bay again, how diverse it is relative to a number of other areas. You know, the bulk of the Western Channel through the middle there is largely super littoral rock. Your area, quite heavy sediments, quite sort of thick and silty, and you've got a lot of sediment coming out, strong tides coming out of the sort of Severn estuary there. So it is very well mixed, the water here. Okay, this is shows you the survey effort. So pretty comprehensive coverage of parts of Lyme Bay. All those purple lines represent track lines of surveys. So strong effort from West Bay, from Brixham over in the west here, and from Weymouth as well. We've done a lot of surveys from there. And here's the bigger picture, looking at the survey effort. It is patchy, but some very concentrated effort. I'm sure you can spot the ferry routes there, the different ones. So I don't know if you can see Ilfracombe and Bideford there going over to Lundy, quite strong. And then Plymouth, where it says United Kingdom, there's Plymouth to Roscoff in orange. The sort of lighter green is the Portsmouth to Bilbao that bends round the corner of Brittany, and various other cross-channel ferries. All the yellow, pale yellow lines are, the ochre colour is the small boat survey effort. And then the black lines are very important because you can see those black lines, very systematic coverage in areas that we did very little of the survey effort, and that's a pelagic fish survey in association with Cefas, the government's Fishery Research Institute. So we should have at least some idea of what's going on in the marine environment off the southwest from all these surveys, you would hope. So this just summarises it. So 17 passenger ferries, 10 freight routes, 50 small boats we've used, 3 research vessels, the Met Office and Cefas research cruisers, and that all adds up to 300,000 kilometres travelled, which is pretty good considering 95% of that is with volunteers, and it's not easy to get people to go out to sea doing surveys. Most bird watchers, for example, like to sit on a headland with a tartan blanket and a flask, peering through a telescope, and it's very hard to encourage them to go out to sea. So that's a pretty tremendous effort, really. So what have we seen then? Let's just run through some of the marine animals off our coast. So the first one, perhaps one of the most iconic and widely distributed dolphin, is the bottlenose dolphin. It's often the species that you're most likely to see along the coast, or it traditionally has been, because there is like an inshore population in the southwest and other parts of the UK. So this dolphin's pretty big. You can see there's the scale of an average size human, and it's got a range of prey items there that it feeds on. It's quite an omnivore, really. It will eat all sorts of stuff, crustaceans, crabs, etc., as well as lots of fish. I think people have seen this dolphin quite often because you get these what's called sociable animals, or lone dolphins, ones that break away from the main pod and for whatever reason seek out human company. So they tend to arrive in harbours and stay there for a length of time. I mean, there's a dolphin off the coast of Western Ireland. It's been there probably about 30 years, actually, off Dingle, the same individual that's hardly been anywhere else. So there's been a few of these animals around the southwest. I originally thought it was all the same animal, but there's actually 5 or 6 lone dolphins that do the rounds of various ports. One of which had the Dorset name of Flipper. Not very imaginative, is it? But yeah, there was one called Flipper in the late 2000s that was seen at Weymouth Harbour, Portland Harbour, Brixham. But it was also seen elsewhere. It had the name of Georges in France and Randy in the Channel Isles. Make that of it what you will. The sort of slightly hippie-ish sounding Findel in Cornwall, which is not surprising perhaps. And then my favourite name for this dolphin was Dave in Kent, more of a sort of pragmatic name. So a lot of people have seen these sociable animals And the latest two to join that sort of cohort was a pair called Harry and Wills, nicknamed not by us, I hasten to add, but by the local dolphin watchers in Weymouth Bay. And these animals turned up in 2019 and used to swim during the pandemic when there was a lot of cruise ships moored up in Weymouth Bay, just swam up and down the cruise ships and hardly went anywhere else. It was very unusual, actually. They did move a little bit out from the ships from time to time and jumped out, etc. But most of the time, they would swim around and around the cruise ships. Probably because one of the reasons is quite good feeding there, perhaps. They're actually quite hard to see sometimes. You'd think being right next to a boat, they were easy, but it's a bit like hide and seek at times. You know, you'd see it and then they'd go around the other side of the boat, then you'd drive round to look for it and they'd go on the other side. So got some cracking shots of them because I used to take people out to show them the dolphins. And here's one feeding on conger eels. So we know at least that's one prey item. I'd actually seen these animals for about a year, photographed them lots of time, but tended to only post, you know, sort of pictures like that on Twitter or Instagram. Really, you know, interesting shots. But we had a nature trek trip, and one of the clients took a fairly routine shot of both the animals showing the fins. You know, a nice shot, but not particularly spectacular, but a good record of the animals. And I retweeted it on Twitter, and Charlie Phillips of Whale and Dolphin Conservation in Scotland said, "I know these two." He said these are from Scotland, which is a bit of a shock. Because there hasn't ever been a recorded movement between Scotland and the Channel before, so that was a bit of a first. But the true identities of these two individuals was sort of finally revealed. So the one on the left is a mother, so it's not male, called Honey, and she was born in 2009 in the Moray Firth. And then in 2016, she had a calf called, which was unnamed. And you can see it was the calf really that gave the identification away. If you look at the dorsal fin on the right-hand side, you can see it's got that knobbly bit. And that makes the animal uniquely identifiable. So they disappeared from the Moray Firth in 2018, having been there all the time. It was a mystery, they just vanished, and then they popped up here in 2019 and then just stayed together constantly as a pair. Although a male did appear occasionally, but then suddenly at the beginning of this year, the calf disappeared and was seen at Brixham and Cornwall, and then it's vanished since then. So we're not sure why they split up, having been inseparable for 6 or 7 years. What had actually happened? Perhaps the most plausible theory is that one of them has become pregnant. As I say, there was a male around, and you know, boys will be boys. So maybe one or even both of them perhaps were pregnant, and there might be a calf soon, because I suppose, you know, you see dolphins a lot, mother-calf pairs, it's a strong bond. So I suppose two's company, three's a crowd perhaps. So maybe the calf went off to give birth, or the mother shoved the calf away because she was pregnant. I can't think of another plausible explanation, so that's a possibility. Anyway, we renamed the calf Whippersnapper because it was the snapper charter that we saw the animal first from. Although the people in Weymouth still refuted that name and still call them Harry and Wills, even though it's a mother and a calf. Okay, we've done quite a lot of photo identification of the bottlenose dolphins, and that work has been taken forward by the Cornwall Wildlife Trust and Plymouth University, a more wide-ranging study. So we've got some really good data on bottlenose dolphins along the south coast through collaboration with Marine Discovery and AK Wildlife Cruises, and as I say, latterly the Cornwall Wildlife Trust. And that data shows that there is a resident population of bottlenose dolphins that don't have any fixed locality. They just move up and down the coast all the time in search of food, but they don't tend to stray offshore. So they might be, you can see on that sort of table there, that they could be in sort of Cornwall one week, Devon the next, back in Cornwall the week after, and then back in Devon the week after that. They really do move quite a long way, perhaps because there isn't a really strong fixed food source. I think this group does get up to your area as well. It doesn't show it on the map, but I think this pod of 20 to 30 animals does range as far as Ilfracombe along the coast there, as well as the north coast of Cornwall. There is also an offshore population, and there doesn't seem to be any mixing in between the two, nor between the population, much larger population on the coast, along the coast of France. So I'll just show you the wider picture. So this is our track lines of effort and the dolphin sightings. So that we've got a coastal population between Land's End and Hampshire that's coastal. Then in between, in the deeper water, we've got an offshore larger population that's probably continuous with those in the Bay of Biscay. Then we've got another separate population around the Channel Isles and Mont Saint-Michel Bay. So in and around the Normandy Peninsula, the Cherbourg Peninsula, they've photographed over 700 individuals there. So it's a big population. But as I say, there's no mixing between that group and the ones on the English side. Okay, on to the next species, the common dolphin. And we were chatting before the talk that some had been seen in your area very recently. So this is a smaller dolphin than the bottlenose and has a different diet as well. It feeds primarily on mackerel and horse mackerel, these pelagic shoaling fish. This is a distribution map of the sightings. You can see it's widely distributed in the deeper waters of Western Lyme Bay during the summer months primarily, but becomes scarcer further inshore, and the further east you go, it becomes scarcer. We don't have good data on whale and dolphin trends, unfortunately, but I was involved producing the Dorset Mammal Atlas, and from that it indicates that this dolphin is getting seen more and more, that it is increasing off the coast of Devon and Dorset, and that's certainly the case on our surveys at sea. We are seeing this dolphin more and more over the last 5 years or so. If you want to see this dolphin easily, there's several companies now that do boat trips from Brixham, 2-hour trips, half-day trips, etc. And during the summer, you can almost guarantee to see this dolphin. It is commonly seen in and around Berry Head. Fabulous animal. The common dolphins usually come to bow ride. So they'll spot the boat and come over and swim alongside like this in front of the bow. They're swimming quite slowly here, but it is the fastest dolphin. They can do about 40 kilometers per hour. There's a calf there. You can see a mother and calf pair. brilliant, great to see. And look at this. This is the distribution. You can see it's a really widely distributed dolphin off your coastline, further offshore, but also in the Western Channel. But then the distribution largely stops if you draw a line between Portland Bill and the Cherbourg Peninsula. You can see all that effort around the Isle of Wight and almost no common seen. And that's because the channel dramatically changes in character where those at that point between Portland Bill and Cherbourg. To the east, you have a strong flood tide that runs in from the North Sea, brings with it a lot of sediment. The water's a lot shallower, and the sea is generally very well mixed and turbid. To the west of Cherbourg Peninsula and Portland Bill, there's much more of a oceanic influence from the North Atlantic, and that brings warmer waters, warmer currents, but also the sea west of Portland does tend to get stratified in the summer, so warmer at the top but colder down the sea column, and that leads to greater productivity generally. So there's much more food available for this dolphin sort of in the western warmer waters. And you can see, as I say, it's really widely distributed off the coast of North Devon, further west there, but nothing in the very rarely seen in the Bristol Channel. It's just too sort of turbid and mix the water. Okay, on to the smallest cetacean that we get along our coast and offshore, the harbour porpoise. So this small cetacean feeds on three main types of food, sort of white fish, the animals on the left-hand side of the screen there, and small pelagic fish like sand eels and sprats and things like that, but also gobies on the seabed as well, that fish on the right-hand side. So that's the harbour porpoise. You can see it's quite widely distributed in Lyme Bay and much more likely to be seen in shallower waters to the north of the bay compared to common dolphin, for example. But it's a species we don't fully understand, the harbour porpoise. It does undergo really quite extreme seasonal fluctuations in its distribution and annual fluctuations. So there was a big UK-wide survey called the SCAN survey in 1993, and they found lots of harbour porpoises in the northern North Sea. But then when they repeated the survey 10 years on, they found this big switch to the southern North Sea and the Channel. And we found that trend on the ferry surveys as well. But then more recently, it's got very scarce again, and it's sort of, very hard to come by over the last couple of years in many parts of the Channel. So they've obviously gone somewhere. I mean, so it just shows these animals will move long distances in search of food. This is the wider distribution. You can see it is widespread, but it's sort of patchy as well. It's quite a hot spot. The waters between Ilfracombe and Bideford and London, you can see a lot of red dots there. And the western central channel is pretty good as well as you can see the southern North Sea there. A lot of sightings, even on the busy shipping route between Dover and Calais. But it's also quite, there's quite a few absent areas off the north coast of Cornwall, very thinly spread on the ground there. Bottlenose dolphins tend to attack porpoises, so they tend to avoid areas with bottlenose dolphins. That's one thing they will do, and they're very influenced by the tide as well. You can almost set your watch by them at certain states of the tide. I think you've got some really good places to see them on the north coast of Devon, but if you haven't seen them or are down here, Berry Head at certain tidal states is really good for them. Although disturbance is an issue for this species, there's a lot of boat traffic through there, and it's not really good to have that when these you know, cetaceans are feeding at a critical time. So that's a sort of current issue, I'm afraid. Okay, on to the next species then. This is the white-beaked dolphin, one that I'm particularly interested in. So this animal likes whitefish, cod, haddock, and whiting are the main food sources. These sort of fish that feed more towards the seabed, demersal fish. That's what the whitebeak's like. This is a distribution map of white-beaked dolphin when the last Cetacean Atlas of the UK was published in 2003. So this is almost like a 25-year distribution, and it shows a complete absence from the channel, apart from one sighting off the coast of Brittany. And you can see it's a sort of northerly distributed dolphin, but it doesn't like deep water. It's associated with colder waters of the continental shelf around northern Britain and rare south of, you know, Sperm Point and Humberside. Pretty much absent from the Irish Sea and western approaches, and then there's a few off the west coast of Ireland. But the blue line, I don't know if you can see the blue line there, that's like the 100 and 200 meter contours of the pink and blue lines. So you don't really get this dolphin beyond those sea depths. It likes to feed in relatively shallow waters, looking for whitefish. Now, I was saying that the reason we did all these Lyme Bay surveys in the first place was to look for Balearic shearwaters. That's another story, really, but we didn't find many in Lyme Bay, unfortunately. But what we did find is white-beaked dolphin, and I was really shocked by this. We were coming back from a fairly unproductive trip at Exmouth and saw a group of 3 biggish-looking dolphins ahead. And I thought, oh, that's great, bottlenose dolphin, that's good to see. But then when we got closer to them, it was obvious they were white-beaked. You know, a complete shock, really, because it's a cold water species, you know, with the nearest known place, you know, off sort of Newcastle in the North Sea. We thought that was a bit of a fluke, if excuse the pun, seeing dolphins here. But I don't know if you look at the animal on the left, you can see there's a couple of chunks out of the dorsal fin. And the next time we went out and the time after that, we kept seeing white-beaked dolphin. So it wasn't a one-off. The animals were actually living in Lyme Bay. So this is that very first sighting of them back in 2007. See those 2 chunks out of the dorsal fin. There again in 2009, 2014, and 2012, a couple of sightings, and still present in 2018. Those markings have been consistent throughout over a, you know, a sort of 11-year, 12-year period. And most of those sightings are more or less in the same place, which is the middle western part of Lyme Bay. You can see that concentration of dots there. That's the great thing about doing surveys. You can, with the effort data, you can see areas with and without dolphins. And the bigger picture really does highlight on our effort related surveys that concentration in central western Lyme Bay, with a few scattered elsewhere. So the big question is, why are they in Lyme Bay? And there's a couple of reasons, really. One of which is the habitat is very similar to the northern North Sea. it's sandy seabed, which is a good habitat for these whitefish, cod and haddock. The other couple of reasons are there's a lot of First and Second World War wrecks in the Lyme Bay, and they're the last sort of hiding places from overfishing. So shoals of cod and whiting can sort of hide out in and around the wrecks and avoid the commercial trawlers. So they're quite rich areas for the main food sources for these dolphins. The other final reason is that this is a cold water dolphin, and it does appear that the sea temperature is on or beyond the limit of what white-beaked dolphin occurs in. So studies have shown that if the sea surface temperature is over 17, then it's too warm for this dolphin. But that doesn't take into account the stratification in the water during the summer months when the sea is at its warmest. So although it might be 17 or 18 at the surface, because of this stratification you get, it's actually quite cold on the seabed where the prey is. So it's cold enough for the dolphins to find food and live here, even though it appears too warm at the surface. So a lot of interest in these dolphins. We've been on the telly a couple of times. We had a coast back in 2009. We managed to get the dolphins at the second attempt and inside out as well in 2013. Got some great footage on that one. Unfortunately, though, it's become a rarer species. Perhaps it has just got too warm now, and there are sort of dwindling stocks of cod as well. They've been largely fished out, unfortunately. You know, the commercial fishermen can't get at them, but sea anglers can, and they do take a lot of fish out of the system. You know, I've been on trips where we're taking 150 to 200 large cod out in a single trip, and if you think of how many fishing trips there are year round from various ports, that's, you know, it soon has a big impact. But they are fantastic animals, and they will come to ride the bow of the boat, as in this case. It's really exciting to see these animals because they're so sought after. This is a pod back in 2019. That's actually the last time I've seen them. They have been around this year, but they've just got very elusive, and we've been a little bit unlucky in missing them. So see that white beak there, very characteristic. Big, strong dorsal fin, almost like a juvenile killer whale, really tall black dorsal fin. But yeah, they are threatened, unfortunately, and predicted to. I think the problem for white-beaked is because they only live in shallow waters and they're retreating northwards, there's almost like nowhere for them to go, because beyond the north coast of Scotland, you're into very deep water. So there's a limit to places that they occur. So the habitat range is shrinking quite rapidly. Used to be a widespread species off the Hebrides, but they've been replaced in recent years by common dolphins as the sea temperatures have warmed up. Moving on to whales, not the country, the animal. And this is the most frequently seen whale in Lyme Bay and surrounding waters. You can see the size. It's probably about 30 feet long, some of the adults. Feeds on sort of shoals of pelagic fish like mackerel and sprats, but it will also eat larger fish and crustaceans as well. So it is an omnivore, as well as plankton, of course, krill, North Atlantic krill. This is the distribution. It's primarily seen in the summer months when the water is warm and you get plankton blooms and big shoals of pelagic fish. And it likes the deeper waters. You can see here, tends to occur in waters greater than 50 meters deep, well offshore. but occasionally you do get coastal sightings of it. This is one of the rarer dolphins that we see from time to time. It's the Risso's dolphin. Very characteristic animal. See all those scratches caused by the teeth of other Risso's dolphins and prey as well, scratching the animals, squid and things. Yeah, it's a squid feeder and cuttlefish as well. There was a really good pod actually of about 30 animals in Lyme Bay this summer, but that's unusual. You can see the distribution here. It's thinly spread in offshore waters. What we do know though is that it has sort of regular seasonal movements that perhaps don't get picked up through our recording, but it goes to certain areas at certain times of the year to feed on seasonal fisheries, cuttlefish off the Brittany coast, for example, and it is quite regularly seen mid-channel in and around the Herd Deep in particular. So, but the really the best place to, if you want to see Rissos though, is hop on the ferry from Penzance to the Scillies, and that seems to be at the moment a really regular place for them. I've been a couple of times and seen them both times recently, and perhaps maybe Judith has as well in your group. Okay, onto some of the rarer species still. This is a humpback whale, and I don't know if anyone recognises that iconic cliff face in the background, that flat sandy hill there. That's the Golden Cap. It's the highest point on the south coast. So we're in the waters off Dorset here. This is back in 1993. There's a humpback around for about 10 days actually. And it was a really different era back then. It's not that long ago, is it? 30 years. But at the time, the locals were lassoing this whale and climbing on it and going snorkeling. Just, yeah, it's so sort of off message now, isn't it? But people were actually doing that. It's hard to believe these days, isn't it? Here's a nice shot of it just off Charmouth. Humpback whale is increasing in UK waters, in the North Sea in particular, places like Whitby, with the recovery in the herring population because that fishery isn't being targeted at the moment. Things like minke whale and humpbacks have really increased, and we're starting to get the halo effect from that in the southwest. So there's been 2 or 3 sightings recently in Lyme Bay. There was this one breaching on the left-hand side off Lyme Regis, part of a pod of 3 humpbacks. And also there was one animal around 2 or 3 years ago in the Brixham area for several weeks. It's difficult though because there's so much sort of static gear around it. It did kept getting tangled up in nets, unfortunately. Although there's plenty of food around, there's plenty of fishermen putting gear out. So it's not a great area for humpbacks because of the fishing pressure. Another rare species we do get from time to time here is the pilot whale, the long-finned pilot whale. And actually, quite a hot spot in the autumn. Again, it's probably related to a seasonal fishery. This is another sort of squid feeder, squid and other type and fish. The pilot whales, you get them around the, in this area, around the Eddystone, in Plymouth Bay in the late summer, early autumn period. The fishermen tell me they see them quite regularly, and we've picked them up a few times on surveys. But other than that, it's quite a sporadic visitor, and I've never actually seen them in Lyme Bay, for example. They tend to like much deeper waters, places like the Rockall Trough off Western Scotland, and the Northern Bay of Biscay is a really good place for them in those deeper waters. Okay, on to the species that we don't get in Lyme Bay that do occur in wider waters. So it's a bit of a surprise really to think that the second biggest mammal on Earth, the fin whale, which can grow up to 85 feet long, is a regular visitor to waters not very far away from well, yourselves at all. So here's the distribution, and you can see this concentration of sightings without too much survey effort west of Lundy. So these are animals we've picked up on freight trips from Bristol to the Bay of Biscay, but also on the pelagic fish survey. And the fantastic thing about the pelagic fish survey is that we can understand why they occur there. So yeah, you've got a deep water trench here, the Celtic Deep or the Georges Channel. And we saw some fin whales on one of the trips. And at the same time, we're collecting data on fish. So we could see on the echogram, I don't know if you can see the red line that's the seabed there. So it's about 100 meters deep. And above it is this dense blue line that's red in places, orange and red. And that's all krill, a massive concentration of krill. So fin whales are coming into the area to feed on these big concentrations of plankton. I don't know if, okay, this is another very rare species, well out of range. It's not a good sign when you get a species like this in Lyme Bay because it's obviously incredibly lost. This is a picture on the left taken off just south of Dartmouth. And you can actually tell what it is from that picture, however bad the picture is. But hoping some of the experts amongst you will recognize that as a sperm whale by the bushy angled blow coming out of the blowhole there. The animal on the right's not Lyme Bay, but that just shows you that angled blow that sperm whales have. So it's a bit like an iceberg, isn't it? You just get in, there's the animal, but you just get a little bit of the body in the blowhole. Okay, just finally finishing off then, we've got the, one of the exciting things is this arrival in recent years, quite dramatic arrival of bluefin tuna, these massive dolphin-sized fish that are incredibly valuable commercially, worth thousands of pounds. And weigh 350 pounds, some of them in weight. And imagine the value of a single tuna fish. They are actually, after a period of research, they are being exploited now commercially. This is one that's got a garfish in its mouth. And now the Bay of Biscay this year going out, sorry, the English Lyme Bay this year going out to see, it's just like the Bay of Biscay now. It's incredible. You've got shoals of sardine and anchovies, flocks of cories and great shearwaters, and then these boils of tuna fish where you get the boiling water as huge numbers of tuna smash through shoals of fish and just clear them all out, and then you're left with millions of glittery scales on the water surface. It's a real spectacle. So the environment is changing very rapidly. So tuna, none at all 10 years ago, but look at the distribution now. It really is quite widely distributed throughout the Western Channel and off the west coast of North Devon and Cornwall, and it's increasing year on year. So yeah, I hope I've whet the appetite, and hope you can go out and see some of these animals for yourself. It really is worth doing, and who knows what you might see. I've only ever taken one sort of really fluky shot, and it was the next one in the picture. I thought it was a bottlenose dolphin jumping out to sea, and it was a grey animal that sort of jumped out a bit. And but then the skipper said, no, it's a thresher shark. So I ran into the wheelhouse because I didn't have my camera on me and just took 2 shots. And luckily both were really good. This is one of them. So just really amazing fluky shot, really, that you do come across these things from time to time from spending time out at sea. Finally, then, moving on to some of the threats to these magnificent animals. So there's a range of pressures in our local marine environment that we need to be concerned about. These include this sort of drowning in fishing nets. That's been a big problem for common dolphins and pair trawling in recent decades in the Western Channel. Disturbance is a growing problem from recreation, but also sort of economic activity. Creating offshore structures can cause great disturbance through noise. And I think it'd be very difficult now for any coastal dolphin to be able to stay in one place without getting totally harassed, just because so many people want to see them and there's so much traffic. So, you know, that's perhaps one of the reasons why there isn't really a fixed local coastal spot for dolphins. There's just too much disturbance. Depletion of food sources is a big issue. We've got lots of tuna at the moment, but that's probably only because they've shifted from elsewhere. It's not really a population increase, and the concern is they could get fished out as well. Climate change, it's a major threat for species like white-beaked dolphin, which I mentioned earlier, are retreating northwards, but there's nowhere to expand the range into. And then habitat degradation and loss through sort of dredging and trawling activities is an ongoing issue, as well as pollution and litter. There's that horrifying statistic about the fact by about 2050 there'll be more litter than fish in the sea. Absolutely terrifying stuff. And ship strikes, some of these faster vessels, is a major issue in some parts of the world for some of the bigger, slower moving animals like northern right whales and sperm whales are getting sort of killed by fast moving marine vessels. So a whole range of pressures. But there are some positives through the work on bottlenose dolphin. Natural England have designated as the whole of the south coast of Cornwall, Devon and Dorset as a management unit for bottlenose dolphin. What that means is that any development work in the marine environment has to take account of the habitat needs of bottlenose dolphins. So this data does have a direct use feeding into policy on a number of occasions. We were quite involved with the Wildlife Trust on the Marine Conservation Zone process, setting up marine nature reserves. And a number of areas have been designated, mainly for static features like reef habitats. And odd-looking square boxes, aren't they, as well? Don't look very natural, the boundaries. But you can see from the sightings of various species, those areas don't really match up where the animals live particularly well. So marine conservation zones in our area only will have a very small role to play in conserving dolphins and whales. It's wider policy measures, tackling overfishing, etc., are what will really help these animals. Thank you very much for your attention, and I just wanted to mention one last thing. Slide was in the wrong order there, but the data has proved hugely valuable to science and in some cases policy. And I haven't really dwelled on that too much, but you know, I could do a whole talk about the research uses of the data, but it is very important. And we can only do those analyses if people go out to sea and volunteer for us. And so I think, you know, if anyone's keen to get involved, we have training courses and many opportunities to go out at sea on different types of vessel and ferry routes, etc. So if you're interested, please do check us out on the MARINELife website, or perhaps chat to Judith as well, who's a good ambassador for MARINELife. Okay, thanks very much. Thanks for your attention.